ado, we're just going to go ahead and get started. I'll monitor the waiting room as we go. And thank you all for being here. So excited. I'm Kelly White, for those of you that don't know me. And I spent most of my career actually in the residential real estate industry. And my last stint was in a professional services company and was an executive recruiter, and have recently started my own business. And the first program is called the Career Formula, helping executives be able to launch into new careers or find new roles as they transition from different companies. So what I really wanted to do with Career Formula Fridays, which, by the way, thank you, this is the very first one, is I wanted to offer to our community the opportunity to talk to people who have made successful career transitions. And so my vision is really to interview a wide variety of different kinds of people that have made career transitions so that you can ask them questions and they can share their stories. So that's a little bit about me, but more importantly, we have a guest today, and her name is Tessa Grashuis. Yes, Tessa Grashuis. I've had such a hard time with Tessa's name, but I think I got it close. And so I had the great pleasure actually of working with Tessa when she worked at Zillow, and she was a recruiter for them, and we worked on several projects together. And I'm going to gush just a little bit, if it's okay, because Tessa is one of the most talented people probably that I've ever worked with really in my career. And so I'm really grateful that when she decided to go out on her own and do something different, and I went out on my own to do something different, that we've stayed connected. And so she was kind of the first person that I thought of that could tell us a little bit about her career journey. And so let me say just a little bit is when she left Zillow, she has started her own copywriting agency, and she did that after enrolling in a professional copywriting program. And I mention that because people ask me all the time, should I get extra education or do something different that way? And so that might be something that's of interest to you to ask Tessa, but she did actually further her education and then start this business. So she works specifically as a partner with professional female career and leadership coaches. And then she uses her background with recruiting and HR in order to help them craft relevant, targeted messaging in order to meet their target audience and drive sales. So welcome, Tessa. I'm so excited to have you. And why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your career story? Wait, let me say this one thing real quick too. We're going to do this in about probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then leave you time to have some questions. But so if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. So Tessa, go ahead and tell us about your career journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. It's always so great to be a part of anything you're doing. I'm blushing, so thank you so much. I'm happy to be your first guest on the maiden voyage. Wish I had a bottle of champagne to smack against my laptop to really commemorate the occasion. So just a little bit about me. I've always been a people person. Naturally, I found myself in people work, as Kelly mentioned, recruiting and HR for people teams. I did a brief stint in healthcare for about a year, and then I migrated to the tech space where I stayed for about 6 years, and I loved it. I live here in Denver. We've got quite a few tech companies. I spent about 4.5 years at Zillow in recruiting, eventually moving to project management, where I designed and led some truly career-changing projects, one of which I worked with on Kelly for about 18 months. Really awesome, innovative stuff, which is, of course, where we met. It's really where I fell in love with building. So starting things that were brand new or didn't exist yet, really make them function efficient and beautiful. That's something I love to do. So that whole experience with Zillow really advanced my career by light years. I'm so grateful for what I learned, and the lessons and relationships that really continue to pay dividends for me are so incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, post-pandemic, the company did experience a significant RIF, or reduction in force, by shutting down a major arm of its business. And that's where I and thousands of other employees were let go. But that led me to my next position. And so that was actually working with a Series A startup as the founding and only recruiter, mind you, able to build an entire talent function from scratch. Like super scratch, we didn't have the ingredients in the cupboard yet kind of scratch. So it was awesome. It was akin to building a bridge as we were crossing it. That's a phrase that I used frequently when I was there. It was hard work, but unbelievably fulfilling for me. I got to work with every person at the company, CEO, engineering, customer success, really across the board. So it was fast and furious work, and I learned constantly. But also, unfortunately, as my colleagues in the tech sector know all too well, it can be an unpredictable environment. And after a year, they too had to make a really, really deep cut. So over the course of a year, actually a year and a day to be exact, I experienced two really big layoffs in the tech space. Right before the holiday season. And it was also a time where there was a significant shift in the recruiting space. Companies were not hiring, and they definitely weren't hiring recruiters. So what led to my career change was kind of all of the above. And it was tough. I had really come so far and risen pretty high and built a lot in the industry. And I was kind of stressed and burnt out, but still kind of found myself asking, who was I without this high paying, seemingly big, important job that I had spent so much time learning and perfecting. A little bit of it kind of felt like it's what made me me and what made me successful and important. And it wasn't. So I took all of December of 2022 after the second layoff to kind of grieve and feel my feelings and decompress and really detach my value from my work, which, spoiler alert, it's easier said than done. It's a spectrum that I still fluctuate on, and it's not all linear. But really, once January 2023 came around, I said, okay, now we start a plan. So my career transition has been a lot about changing that mindset and pivoting actual careers. And of course, staying close with people like Kelly in my network to kind of coach me through that mindset shift.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. I had forgotten that you had gone through two large reduction in forces. And so how did you end up picking, I guess two things I had, like, how did you pick the career path, number one, but how did you get over the hurdle of going from, I mean, I know you said some of it was like with identity and all of that, which I 100% relate to, but how did you get over the hurdle of deciding to do your own gig instead of being in corporate? And then how did you choose specifically what it is that you decided to do?
Yeah, definitely a lot of research and mindset work. I really went into full curiosity mode. I had also known for a while that I wanted to shift gears out of recruiting, but I didn't want to leave that completely behind. I love the work that I got to do. I loved getting to work with people and be really in the minutia of a business and see all of the things behind the curtain. I just really thrived in that kind of space. And so, recruiting and HR and people were in my blood already. They weren't going anywhere. I settled in that it was okay. I had that skill set. It wasn't going to fly away if I moved to something else. And I just really started looking. I wanted to stay connected to people, specifically female leaders. I had actually led the Women's Plus ERG with my last company, and I loved partnering with professional women in particular. Excuse me. I also wanted to learn something new while expanding the skill sets I already had. I had identified that for my part in my space, I had hit the ceiling for myself in recruiting, and it wasn't really a growing industry at the time. And I thought, not only did I want to keep learning and take on another skill set, I felt like it was essential for me to do so, to continue to be viable in the market. I thought I need to learn more skills, and I was ready to be able to do that. I was in a space that I could. So I kind of pushed against the voice in my head that said, hey, your career has to be XYZ to count as a career. And I was, this is a blank slate. It's a new opportunity. And this is really the discovery phase of the project. And I'll find what I find and go from there. So the way I found copywriting was I love words and I love to write. Like I volunteered to write the respectful workplace and compliance policy with my last company, kind of left right, because I just wanted to get my hands on writing something. So I really leaned into that. And I knew that people were always passing writing projects on to me because I wanted them. They didn't have the time or desire to do them. So I thought, what other kinds of writing do other people, specifically business owners, not like to do? And it turns out most of it. So after lots of research, I enrolled in a professional copywriting program. It's called Write Your Way to Freedom. It's now number 24 in education on the Inc. 5000 list in February of 2020. So almost a year ago. And it's, it's a course, ongoing educational resource, huge community of professional copywriters, and it's something that would really keep me learning. And ultimately, that's what I wanted. And that's really where my research led me.
Wow, you nailed that. You got both of those in. I don't know how you did it, but great job, Tessa. Yeah, I'm very curious about this hitting a ceiling, because I really have experienced that at multiple phases of my career. I'm sure probably other people on the call have too. Was that the key thing? I know it was the key thing for me in terms of deciding to do my own thing, is to try to be able to have more autonomy to do certain things, but primarily just to see how far I could really go. So do you mind speaking just a little bit more to that?
Yeah, of course. I got a little taste of that at Zillow, the first project that I ever led, which of course you and I partnered on. And then when I took the job at the Series A startup, we were building things from the bottom. I was completely responsible and accountable for the talent program that I created. I hired everyone in the company at the time. I worked with everyone. I was really, really in the trenches. And so I got a little taste of what it felt like to be accountable for something that I had created. And I really, really enjoyed it. And even as, I started to kind of get to what ultimately ended up being, the last couple of months of my tenure there, I even started to feel a little bit of that ceiling encroaching on my headspace, where I felt like I had done this before. I've built these programs. I loved it. And then getting kind of into, more of a maintenance mode where it was really going to be search and find people, which is also something I really love to do. It wasn't where my passion really was settling in. I liked to create things and work with businesses and build things. Again, of course, I loved writing, and I just think I was hungry for a different kind of challenge. I'd hired thousands of people at that point. I had been through the process many times, and I love that I had that skill set. I just really had a desire for that ceiling to expand.
Mm. I love how you said that. Yeah, well said. So then my next question is, what has been or what is the biggest, I mean, there's probably multiple, but maybe when you started and maybe there's another one now, but what's the biggest obstacle? And then how did you overcome it, or what obstacles have you encountered?
Yeah, well, I'm sure Kelly, as somebody who started multiple businesses, this answer kind of changes, maybe depending on the mood or the day, or some of the things that you're experiencing as a solopreneur. But a couple of things for me were definitely untethering my value from my career. So I could see the transition for what it was, which was just a transition and not complete and utter failure. So probably anyone who has gone through layoffs understands that kind of pit in your stomach, where it's just like, where do I go now? You definitely feel a bit of that despair. So moving past that was certainly a challenge, and embracing the fact that careers aren't linear things that move in one and only one direction. So if they don't move in one direction, that means I don't have to start over. When I worked for Zillow, the previous CEO, Spencer Raskoff, said that Zillow's philosophy to careers was that they were a jungle gym and not a ladder. And that was a phrase that internally lives rent-free in my brain. And sometimes, honestly, these concepts are easy for me. And like I said, other days they're not, because like my career, my mindset isn't linear either. So it shifts a little bit. The most important step is the next one. That's another, big challenge of mine. A previous manager of mine would say to us, to our team, we can't boil the ocean. You can't look at everything and try to do it all at once. You do one step at a time, and then you build on that momentum as you move forward. And I like to know it all. I like to do it all, and giving myself some of that grace and just saying, this is something new that you're going to learn. I have a track record of learning new things and just telling myself that I'm capable of learning new stuff. And that I would do that. So something that helps me overcome these challenges is to change the language around them. So this is an opportunity. I get to learn these new things. I'm retooling. That's a big shout out to my dad for that one. That's something that he told me was, you're just retooling right now. And I that's something that has stuck with me as well. And kind of the language and the mindset shift is, I think, a really big player.
Yes. Well, you can see me. I don't know about y'all, but I'm over here kind of frantically writing some things down. So I loved the careers aren't linear and that they are a jungle gym, not a ladder. So thank you for sharing that. And that really is now going to be stuck in my head. So that's as a career coach and job strategist, that's probably a good one to remind people of. So brilliant. So I'm sure everyone is anxious to hear. So what advice would you give anybody that is thinking, I mean, about a career transition or I love this notion of, your career not being linear. So what should you be thinking about on a regular basis about your career so that you're always designing a career or a path instead of like being at the mercy of things just happening, I guess?
Sure. I think continuous learning, whatever that might look like for you, is always a good idea. Something that I always really enjoyed was YouTube videos, going to different webinars, just hearing, learning through osmosis. And not everything will be super sticky at the time that I hear it, but perhaps later on down the line, I'm like, oh, I remember hearing this somewhere, and it just kind of comes back up in my brain. So being a lifelong student is something I think that's always served me. Maintaining connections with people, because you never know where things will lead for you. And it's also just great to remain connected with people because connections lead to more learnings. And I just think that that's so wonderful. And also, to whatever end feels right to you, go through the discovery phase. Something that I learned when managing and designing projects was that people often wanted to dive straight into execution. They wanted to just fix the problem, and we hadn't even really defined what the problems were, or we hadn't brainstormed solutions or come up with some even soft framework of a plan to start to attack what we thought these problems were. So I noticed that the discovery phase was always something that was skipped. And I think that, for me, going through a career transition, that phase was essential. It was very important to really dig in and look at things. And ask yourself questions like, what do I value? What are your non-negotiables, things that I'd prefer to leave behind, just those kinds of exercises. And being okay with being uncomfortable. You're not going to know everything because it's brand new. And also really releasing the valve on the should tank, which is really hard. It's not everyone's situation is the same. And I just remember, a mentor of mine telling me in the early days of my career pivot that my career didn't have to be any one thing. Just because I'd been a recruiter didn't mean I had to stay a recruiter. And that could really be anything that I wanted it to be as I started to go through the discovery phase. So, I built my business on the weekend. I worked part-time at a tea house on the weekends because it lets me interact with human beings live and direct, which is essential for me and my mental health. So that's something that I've noticed for myself. And I get to use a different part of my brain and, I get an opportunity to hear how people are speaking. And as a wordsmith, I love language. And, that's just something that I wouldn't have entertained if I had been in another position. And so just really being okay with the uncomfortable journey, because it can lead to some pretty cool things.
Yeah, that resonates for me, really. The discovery phase, especially if you're starting something from scratch, whether it's for yourself or within a business, I know for me, that was an uncomfortable phase of starting what I was doing. It took me what I thought seemed like forever, because for me, it was like 3 weeks, you know what I mean? But it was really important to allow that to come in and actually try. I don't know about you, Tessa, but to try some things, like that was an important thing for me too, because then I could see what I liked or didn't like. So giving yourself the space to do that, once again, not being a linear thing. We want things to be linear because I think in some ways it makes it easier. But yeah, that's true. That really give yourself that discovery space. That was really great advice. Well, we have a question. So Lauren, thank you. Lauren says, how did you know what to charge, and then how to set yourself up as an independent? That's one. And then why don't you answer that, and I'll ask the other parts of the question then. So how did you know how to charge, and then how did you set yourself up as an independent?
Yeah, thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, really great questions. Fortunately for me, the program that I enrolled in is incredibly comprehensive. It's not just a copywriting course, which is something that I wanted, but it talks about how to start building your business as a solopreneur. So, setting up like you're doing business as, or like an LLC. She goes through things that talk about, pricing your services, particularly as somebody who, when you're just starting out to when you start to get a little bit more experience. So in my research, when I had kind of been looking at, okay, if I'm going to pay for my continuing education, then what do I really want from that? How robust do I want it to be, and kind of what do I need in this phase? And those were things that were important because I didn't know them. I think, knowing what we want is just important as starting to realize what we don't know. And I didn't know a whole lot. I had never had to set my own prices. I'd negotiated salaries on behalf of myself and others, but I had never had to set individual kind of a la carte prices or create packages. And so that was definitely like a learning curve, but I had a resource to be able to do that because I had looked into that. That's a really important thing. I think especially we as women, we get a little bit harder on ourselves talking about money and, equating our value, really quantifying our value like in a monetary way. And that was something that even the woman who started my program was acutely aware of. And she talks about that. And I know that as a, professional woman as well, particularly in the HR space. So I know that can be challenging, but there's some really great resources out there, but that's how I was able to do it in this space.
Great. So the other question is, how did you set up a website? And I'm going to go ahead and hop in here too. Tessa knows my story, but I will just say that when I started, because I had so much don't know is like the way I like to say it, is I actually hired someone to help me, with my website, and that didn't work out. So I am an example of like, I did not get my website up, I think, until it was maybe late October, and I started doing business in July. So I would just say that you can do it without a website. And literally, if anyone is going to set up a website, I mean, we have an expert on this call, Christine George, about anything with marketing too. So you could reach out to her, but I'm happy to share the pitfalls at some point with anyone. If you do decide to set up a website, please talk to myself or Christine or Tessa. We can probably give you the things to avoid. But Tessa, did you set up a website, and then how did you find clients?
Yes, I did set up a website. That was a fun experience. I hadn't done it before. It was very intimidating. It's funny, the things that as you go through your journey that feel intimidating, and then you do them, and then you're like, that's fine. And then the next thing becomes intimidating. So it took me, a few weeks. Within my course, there was another woman who was a copywriter, and she was a web designer, and she had a few other specialties. And so I bought a mini packet of a tutorial of how to create my website in Squarespace from start to finish. So
Smart.
I learned a lot of things that weren't just necessarily using it like a Squarespace template, which is great. For me, I'd never done anything back end with a website. I didn't really know how it worked. So I knew that I needed a little bit more education in that. In her course, she talked about the importance of making sure like your photos are compressed so that they don't lag your website, things like that I didn't know about. And so that was very helpful for me. And I thought of that as an investment for me, but also my business and for my clients, because when they get to that phase, or if they have questions about that, it's something that I know now and I could talk about a little bit more. So yes, I did make my website. It was quite a journey. It was a really cool experience. It's a lot of work, but it's something that's like very fulfilling.
It is worth it. I totally agree.
Thanks, Christine.
The other question here, so we've got a few more minutes, and Tessa and I can stay over a little bit if anyone else wants to stay on, so we're happy to do that. But I think this is a great next question from Megan, which is, how did you prepare financially for the transition from a high-paying job to starting your own company from scratch? And then did you have to make any lifestyle changes? Or what did you do to prepare for doing that? That's a great question.
That's an excellent question. So for me, a couple of different things. So I come from a long line of penny pinchers. I have 5 siblings. My dad immigrated to the States in the hope that we could have the American dream. We were a large family. 2 of my parents were educators. We're no strangers to being frugal. Our core value was savings. Okay. I'm familiar with this concept. So I've always been a saver. Fortunately for me and in my space and with my partner, we we had lived below our means, and were able to accumulate a really nice pad of savings. I think because, I had been laid off once, and I always had it kind of in the back of my mind, what if this happens again? And so I really did save quite a bit of money for myself, to be able to have that padding for the future. At the time, I didn't know what that padding would be for, but it did end up being a really great investment for myself. And then something else, as far as lifestyle changes, I gutted everything. We have the essential bills that we need to pay. And, like our rent and food and electric and, car payment, stuff like that, that we just, really have essentially. And I cut everything else out. And it never ceases to surprise me how much that stuff accumulates, eating out here and there, and, paying like delivery services, or going, paying for like Netflix and Hulu and Prime. All of these little things really do add up significantly. But I've always been a budgeter. If you're somebody who wants to be a little bit more strategic with your budget, there's an app that I use. I think it's called Every Dollar. So I really track like my pennies, and that's something that I've used since college. So budgeting has been a really important piece of it, because it's not easy. The second thing I would say is that I went and got a part-time job as well, so to supplement my income. So I do have some of that savings, that padding as well, and cutting out everything, so that we can just live essentially. And then having a part-time job to get me out of the house and interacting with people, but earning some money as well, so that that savings account depletes at a much slower rate.
That's great advice. Well, I want to make sure, Tessa, that you are able to give everyone, how to find you, and you could put it in the chat, but maybe also say it. And then, like I said, we're willing to hang on a little bit longer if anyone has any other questions or wants to stay, but why don't you let people know where they can find you, so that they can find you if they want to?
Yeah, of course. And my name is just here on the screen as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll drop it in the chat as well, if that's helpful. I have my website. You're welcome to take a peek at it. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn if anyone wants to have like a virtual coffee chat, or just get connected. I'd love to follow you and see what you've got going on as well. I think it's so wonderful to be able to stay connected in this way. So definitely feel free to shoot me a LinkedIn request, or send me a DM if you want to chat a little bit later on or another time. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, great. Thank you.